may have heard that we're facing some very serious environmental problems. Climate change, the extinction of species, toxics in our food and water supply, ocean pollution. But I'm guessing that you've heard a lot less about what it will actually take to turn the situation around. What will be required to move us as a society onto a different path? Well, it turns out that over the past 25 years, thousands of researchers from across the social sciences have been asking precisely the same question. And I'd like to share with you one very important part of the answer that we've come up with. Now, sharing this idea is not easy, make no mistake, because it's invisible. This subject is invisible. Normally, when we learn about environmental problems, it's through nature documentaries, right, which feature this raw physicality, like this sea eagle capturing its prey. In contrast, my subject is something you cannot touch, you cannot see, yet it's an incredibly powerful force in our world. So powerful that it literally determines whether eagles and grizzly bears and wolves and ourselves live or die. And I'm talking about the rules that we use as a society and that shape our individual behaviors and the way that we interact with the planet. Now, normally when you hear about rules, what comes to mind are images like this. This is not me at a different stage of my career, but from the time that we're children, we're bombarded with rules from our teachers, from authority figures. Here, if you look closely enough, you'll notice that she's wearing fairy wings, so clearly she's up to no good. And often you'll hear that if you want to be innovative and you want to bring about change in the world, you need to break all the rules. Well, it turns out the story of rules runs a lot deeper than that. And I'd like to share that story with you, beginning with the remarkable efforts of a woman named June Irwin. June Irwin is a country doctor in a small town of Hudson, Quebec, in Canada. And June Irwin noticed that her patients were coming down with a variety of strange skin ailments and other diseases. And she suspected that the cause was the pesticides that are routinely sprayed in lawns and gardens throughout North America. So she tested the blood of her patients, and actually found traces of pesticide residue in their blood. And as she dug into the medical literature, she discovered that children are especially susceptible to these effects. So June Irwin went to the local town hall in Hudson, Canada, and said, "This makes no sense. We should get rid of these things." And at first they ignored her, but eventually the town of Hudson passed a new rule, a city ordinance, that banned all cosmetic uses of pesticides, all non-essential uses of pesticides. Well, when Canada's billion-dollar pesticide industry caught wind of this, they freaked out, and they sued the town of Hudson, saying they should have no right to decide what poisons are used in their community. Well, next, two things happened. First, they lost the lawsuit. Second, other towns heard about what was going on in Hudson, and dozens of cities and then entire provinces started passing rules of their own, such that today, fully 8 provinces within Canada have placed these bans on all non-essential uses of pesticides. Well, when the industry caught wind of this, they took the case all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court. And the High Court of Canada ruled unanimously that Hudson was well within its rights. And so as a result, there was a remarkable transformation across the country of Canada. But the story doesn't end there. Meanwhile, in the United States, the pesticide industry decided they did not want to see a repeat of what occurred in Canada. So they started traveling from state to state, lobbying state legislatures to create new rules that make it illegal for any city or town to decide what poisons are sprayed within its jurisdiction. This time, the industry got exactly what they wanted. And today, no fewer than 41 states have these preemption rules that make it illegal for communities to control pesticides. As a result, while Canadian kids can run around and play on lawns that are essentially pesticide-free, in the US we spray 127 million pounds of pesticides on our lawns every single year. What June Irwin and her opponents in the pesticide industry understood is that rules matter. In Baltimore, the people understand that rules matter. In a neighborhood called Patterson Park, the neighbors got together and said, why do we have these unsightly alleyways throughout our town and our neighborhood that just serve to attract drugs and crime? And they went to the mayor, they organized and convinced the mayor to pass a new rule that now allows any community throughout Baltimore to gate off these alleyways and transform them into vibrant sites of community interaction. In the state of Oregon, they understand something about the power of rules. Bicycle advocates there asked a very simple question. Why is it that federal transportation dollars all go toward infrastructure for automobiles? What if instead we were to take just 1% of those funds and devote it to improving the infrastructure for bicycles? The result? A complete transformation in how people get to work and school in places like Portland that has one of the highest rates of ridership in the United States. Now, as a political scientist, I spend a lot of time trying to understand why societies change the way they do things. And why is it that some communities seem to be heading towards sustainability, making real progress, while other communities are heading in precisely the opposite direction? And a very big part of the answer that I've been able to come up with has to do with the rules. If you want to understand how social change works, you need to understand something about these things called social rules. So what are social rules exactly? Well, what I'm about to reveal is that this room is filled with rules right now that are shaping our behaviors. And I have a confession to make at this point. I harbor for many years a sort of deep-seated jealousy of my friends and colleagues in the natural sciences. You know, they get to go out in the field with butterfly nets and binoculars and check out these cool bucolic scenes. Not so for political science. So I would like to invite you right now to join me on a political safari of sorts. And if we're very quiet and observant, we might actually observe some rules in action. There's one right now. The carpeting on the exits from this theater is actually releasing much fewer toxic vapors than was the case 10 years ago because of new rules passed by the California State Legislature that controls them. The location of the exits from this theater and the signs above them are shaped by a 100-year-old set of rules called the Life Safety Code. And dozens and hundreds of experts meet every year, firefighters and engineers and others, to continually debate and revise these rules, right down to everything such as the width of the letter on the word exit. There are, in fact, thousands of rules in your pockets and purses right now. Yes. If anybody has a cell phone, would you be so kind as to take it out and hold it up in the air? Anybody have a cell phone on them? I do appreciate you conforming to the rule of having those on silent mode throughout this presentation. 250,000 rules are governing those cell phones right now, specifically the patents that made it possible for these companies to bring this technology to market. If I might ask, if I'm not breaking too many rules in asking such a delicate question, any of you wearing makeup today by chance? Yes. Okay, so inevitably there's a little bit of laughter when I ask that question on the part of the men in the audience. And let's consider for a moment why that is. There's a social rule, in this case a cultural norm, that says women can wear makeup and men cannot. So that it seems funny or sort of absurd to imagine that men would wear makeup, right? Those of you who are wearing makeup may be interested to know there is a battle taking place, and no safari would be complete without some sort of battle for supremacy, especially where the female of the species is concerned. There's a battle between two sets of rules. If your makeup was manufactured in Europe, you can rest assured that there's no toxic lead in it. If it was made in the United States, we have no idea, because the companies are not even required to report what it is that goes into that makeup. If you'll all join me in taking a deep breath of air, in and out. Are you sure you want to know? It's actually good news, thanks to these women right here, and others like them in Los Angeles in the 1940s and 1950s, who demanded new rules in order to clean up the air. And that movement spread from LA throughout California in the United States and around the world. And as a result, the smog levels in LA have been steadily declining ever since. Now, TED Talks are all about exchanging ideas, ideas worth sharing. But even our right to share ideas is itself shaped by things like the First Amendment and the right to free speech. And that's the thing about rules. We take them for granted as part of the natural order of things. Of course we have the right to speak our mind, right? But rules and freedom in particular is a little bit like oxygen. You only notice it when you don't have it, right? As Nelson Mandela experienced under the collection of rules known as apartheid. And let's not forget that never in the history of the human species have most people lived in a democracy, ever, including today. These rules are everywhere. They are how civilization works. They include property rights that determine who rules, not only who rules the earth, but who actually owns the earth, and whether people have access to wild spaces to explore. They include transportation policies that determine whether your morning commute looks like this or like this. And you really have to wonder what's going on in the mind of the guy with the red shopping bag in the lower right. Is there room for one more on this train, or should I wait for the next one? Even simple pleasures like enjoying a day on the beach is shaped by rules. In fact, very recently, many beaches throughout the United States were off limits to people of color. And it was only because of the efforts of people during the civil rights era, like this protest in St. Augustine, Florida, called a wade-in, a sort of corollary to the lunch counter sit-ins happening throughout the South. These groups of young people did wade-ins, and here they're attacked by segregationists on the beach, but ultimately prevailed in changing the rules so that today, a simple pleasure like a day at the beach is available to all of us. So the basic idea that I want to share with you is very simple. If you want to change the world, change the rules. And this brings us to what is surely the greatest misconception whenever anybody talks about the environment. And that is the notion that if we just do the little things, like driving a Prius and carrying around a reusable coffee mug and riding a bicycle to work, that somehow those little individual isolated actions are going to add up to meaningful social change. They will not. It's a lie. Or as my colleague Mike Maniates puts it, you cannot plant a tree to save the world. Now don't get me wrong, the little actions are great. I recycle and ride my bike and garden with native plants. I have a compost pile. These things are wonderful, okay? But we're talking about really big environmental problems, okay? Currently, 1 out of every 3 freshwater fish species in North America is at risk of extinction. 1 out of every 3. Globally, 700 million people still don't even have access to safe drinking water. And here's a bit of data I put together recently. This is an eye-opener, at least for me. Globally, more people die every year from air pollution than from all deaths from all wars combined. Tackling these big problems requires big levers. We need to not just do our part as consumers, buying the organic strawberries, but as citizens, as active participants in a vibrant democracy, demanding that our decision makers put in place rules that reflect our shared values. Now, fortunately, there is a mountain of academic books and articles on the topic of rules and how they matter for the environment. Unfortunately, no one outside of academia has ever even heard of this. And so I decided I wanted to try and do something about this and launch something called the Social Rules Project. And over the past 3 years, I've had the great privilege of working with over 100 students throughout Southern California, from animators to music composers and computer scientists and policy analysts and others who are trying to breathe life into this idea and encourage people to become rule changers. So, if you would like to move beyond feel-good environmentalism and make a real difference, what can you do? First of all, diagnose deeply. What we see are the physical manifestations, right? But if you want to bring about real change, whether it's more trees in your community or a change in the nature of the cafeteria food to make it more delicious and healthful, this requires digging down to get to the root causes of these outcomes. Oftentimes what we see today was the result of decisions made long ago and encoded in rules, and these are things that you can change. Secondly, think long term. There's always the risk that today's burst of enthusiasm for the environment or other worthy social goals will just last a few years, and then society moves its attention to new things. But real social change has 2 pieces to it. First, we need to move away from the old pattern, but secondly, we need to make sure that the new pattern sticks. And so a rule is just an idea with an anchor attached to it. And why would you want to attach an anchor to your idea? Because we don't just want clean, healthy drinking water for a week. We don't just need to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions for one election cycle. We need to institutionalize these new ideas and new practices in the very fabric of society. That's why when social scientists study this stuff, when we study rules, we refer to them as institutions. We need to inject new life into our laws and our policies and our business contracts and our design standards and our city codes and our cultural norms in the very gears and wheels of civilization. That's how you get real lasting social change. To be a rule changer doesn't just mean making more rules. The rules are already there. They're spinning their gears and cogs 24/7. Okay? To be a rule changer is simply a matter of making sure that the rules that run the world are not ruining the world. So, yes, ride a bicycle to work, but don't forget to lobby your city council for more bike lanes. And yes, undertake the individual pursuits and connections to the earth that are so meaningful to us as isolated individuals. But don't forget that it takes a social movement to create the broader social conditions in which the individual spirit can thrive. Thank you.